Hello everyone, it's Johnny Ball here from Campaign Force. I am passionate about making our politics a better place and in sharing all the secrets that I've learned from many years of working behind the scenes at politics. So, I'm here to talk to you about what happens at an election count. Stay tuned because I'll be covering what happens at the verification, then the count, and how we all get the result in our local democracies at every level of government. Check it out. My name is Johnny Ball, and I'm the founder of Campaign Force, a not-for-profit that inspires, trains and coaches the armed forces community to stand up and serve again. I've served on the front line of military operations and in civilian life, the front line of UK politics. So, what can you expect to happen at a count? Soon we will all be going to the polls on the 6th of May across the country in local elections, devolved government, regional government, mayoralty, you name it. Police and Crime Commissioner. Let's not forget about those folks too. Sorry guys. But anyway, coming up, lots of elections. And this whole process has been really unusual over the last few months. I've run the campaigns of hundreds of political campaigners over the years, from European down to parliamentary and local government elections too. And this one has been an exceptional campaign to win and fight. And with this one also comes the count. Now the count has of course changed and adapted to the world that we live in, but by and large the count is an area that is of mystique to many of the public. You see it on the TV in terms of when the swingometer kicks in and the results come in one by one overnight, but few people get to experience what actually happens behind the scenes of a count. I have been to absolutely shed loads of them, and I can tell you it's a really tiring, because it's late at night through to the early hours of the morning, exciting, fraught experience, and emotional too. And I just want to cover off a few things with you to let you know what happens. So, first up, you've all been to the polling stations, and polling stations in this country you can two ways of voting pretty much, or three if you include proxy, but essentially most people will either vote by post or they will vote in person at a polling station. Polling stations are open from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. at night, so a long day for the staff manning those polling stations in village halls, places like schools, less so at the moment because of COVID, and community centres up and down the UK. So, what happens after the people have stopped knocking on your doors and annoying you and stopped reminding you to vote? Well, all those boxes need to go somewhere for something that they call the count. Now, there's a couple of things that actually have to happen before you can actually declare the result of an election. First up is the verification process. Now, unfortunately, the results are very rarely declared on one night these days in a lot of elections. The exception to that tends to be the general election, where they want a decisive, clear result pretty soon. But in local elections these days, of which there are about 4,000 local councillors out of the 20,000 going up for election on the 6th of May, and indeed the police and crime and the parish councils, etc., many layers of government, this is going to be split over a couple of days. In fact, several days if you take into account the Police and Crime Commission count too. But the one thing that will happen on that night, so after the election itself on the 6th of May, is the verification process. Now what this is basically a way to ensure that open democracy is alive and well in this country, and that all the votes that have been cast and issued match. So all of those little boxes will come from village halls, community centres and schools, or from wherever they may be in your community, and they will meet in one place. So they will be securely transported to a central location. And this will happen immediately after 10 p.m. on the day of the election itself. And when that happens, all those boxes are assigned numbers depending on the polling station that they belong to. And those ballots will be emptied out and they will then begin to be counted. But they're not being counted in terms of the party political votes. At this stage, it's completely separate. It's what we call the verification process. And what the presiding officer will want to know from the local authority who oversees the election is that all of the ballots that he or she has issued on behalf of the country are actually corresponding to those votes that have been cast. So stage one is that all those votes will be put out on table, and lots of people from the local authority will start looking at those and sorting them out into various piles depending on the election itself. But we're not at this stage counting the party political. We're literally verifying what's gone out and what's come back in are the same. Now, when they're doing this, legislation dictates that they have to be counted up, face up. So you can, for political campaigners and polling agents and candidates who observe the process for open democracy, can actually get an idea of how the election's going for them. And what you will see is clipboards and people doing 5-bar tally charts of how each polling station is performing to get an indication of how that election's going. And this will go on late into the morning until the presiding officer is happy that all the votes that he or she has issued match with what has come back in. And there'll be someone there on a PC and they'll be like, happy days, all of that matches. All those votes, including postal votes, are then chucked back into the boxes, sealed. And if you're an election agent or a candidate, you can actually sign this as well to seal that. And those are then securely put away. And what usually happens in the olden days, you should then crack on with the count and put them all into different party piles. But these days, what tends to happen is that those boxes then come out the next day. You may have heard Monty, my dog, morale officer, shout in the background. Apologies. But those boxes will then, the following day, be brought back out, and everyone will return tired, beleaguered, back to that location, and they will then start the count itself. And this is where the fun begins. Counting agents who have an legal appointment and election agents who oversee the election on behalf of the candidates and the candidates will be gathered round tables looking at the local authority staff, putting those votes into different piles. Now, depending on how many candidates are standing in the election, so for example, in many local authorities where they have multi-member wards, people have an opportunity to vote for 3 people. So that's quite a complex way of counting. So the way that they do this in order to simplify it are things like kangaroo boards, where essentially they will line up all the ballots, put a ruler out, have a score sheet at the end, and they'll go along line by line of the ballot papers, all lined up like soldiers, and they will add those up and total those up that batch at a time in order to start having a sheet that will count up all of those ballot papers. Now, in single member wards, it's a lot more simpler. These will be put into trays and then counted in batches of 25, 50, however that a local authority is doing it. And then what you'll see is a virtual bar graph of ballots behind the counters as the votes popularity in their party trays start to mount up. So you get a real sense of how that's going. Now, this process is done by ward, constituency by constituency across the country until finally a declaration is made at the end. Now, the reason you don't know much about this is because it's actually illegal to film the process. You may see from the press gallery the counts going on, but to actually film people counting out votes as part of the Representation of the People's Act of 1983, it's actually an election offence to do that. So, therefore, it takes people like me to tell you exactly what's going on. But after all this has happened and the votes have been counted in, election agents and the candidates will be called forward to the presiding officer, and before the announcement of the declaration of the result itself, the individual candidates and the agents will be told what the result is provisionally, and it is this stage that they can request a recount. So if it's really close and I know there's a few dozen votes in it, depend on the size of the ward. At that stage, you can request a recount. And there are numerous ways of doing this. You can have a full recount, which does happen. And there's been general elections that have been won by literally 4 votes. Or in the event of a tie, you can do something like tossing a coin for the result. That actually happens, kids. True story. Or you can have, obviously, various recounts going on through the night. So that's where the really exciting stuff happens. But all in all, that process will then eventually be drawn to a conclusion, and the presiding officer will then declare the result of the election. And that is the legal declaration that that person is an elected representative, depending on what level of government that they're standing on. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour through both the verification and the count process. Used to happen on one night, no longer does in the main. Really boring. They split it over 2 days now. It used to be much exciting, but more tiring when they did it over one. And hopefully this has added value to your knowledge about the mystique of elections. My passion is to share all the secrets that I know about working in politics over the years, so that we can get better politics, and in particular, those from the armed forces community stand up and serve again in public life. I've been Johnny Ball. You've been watching the Veterans in Politics podcast channel, brought to you by Campaign Force. If you've liked this, hit subscribe, hit that ring a bell, and share this with a friend, because we need to make our politics better, and sharing this information is just one way of doing it. Thank you.